Sarah, are you under arrest on suspicion of murder?
If there ever was a pair of so-called criminal geniuses who somehow managed to be both terrifying and ridiculously pathetic at the same time, it was these two. Sarah and Katrina honestly thought they were the main characters in some dark crime thriller. The only problem? Yeah, they had zero brains, zero finesse, and not even a hint of basic competence to pull it off. Armed with burner phones, GPS trackers, and a diary so detailed it might as well have been a written confession, they proudly came up with what they called the perfect murder. Except, spoiler alert, there was absolutely nothing perfect about it. Their victim, 60-year-old Sadie Hartley, was a kind, successful woman whose only crime was falling in love with a man who used to date one of them. And for that, she was hunted down and brutally killed by two jealous dreamers who couldn't tell the difference between real life and some badly written movie script. What happened next was a crime so stupid, so pointless, and so mind-blowingly incompetent that even the detectives described it as a mix between tragedy and absurdity. Hey guys, what's up? This is one of my first videos on the Jackson channel where we dive into real true crime stories, and honestly, sometimes these cases just leave you, I don't know, sad, you know? Drop a comment with the most shocking or unbelievable true crime fact you've ever heard, hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to leave a like. Your support seriously means a lot. So, today's story takes us to Helmshore. It's this small village nestled in the Rossendale Valley, a quiet, well-off corner of England where crime feels like something that happened somewhere else. It's the kind of place where old textile mills stand as relics of the past. Soft green hills hug the horizon, and evenings fall into silence long before the pubs close their doors. In that peaceful setting, Helmshore seems like the perfect spot for slow, quiet days. It was January 2016 winter in full swing. Like most of England that time of year, Helmshore streets were almost empty. Most people were tucked away at home, trying to stay warm, maybe just enjoying a cozy evening indoors. And because everything seemed so calm, it was almost impossible to imagine that something truly horrific was about to happen. On the southern edge of the village sat Sunnybank Road, exactly the kind of quiet, picture-perfect English street you'd expect. Neat lawns, friendly neighbours, and homes worth around £500,000. And honestly, the house itself, it was gorgeous, the kind of place people dream about when they imagine a peaceful life. Living there was 60-year-old Sadie Hartley, a successful businesswoman, a devoted mother of two, and the partner of former firefighter Ian Johnston. Together, they were well respected in the community, quiet, friendly, and part of the close-knit circle that had grown over the years. But on the evening of the 14th of January 2016, behind the cosy walls of their beautiful home, everything changed in an instant. Helmshore was about to witness something darker than anyone could have imagined. The next day, worry started spreading slowly among Sadie's friends. Nobody had seen her in a while. She wasn't answering her phone, and she hadn't shown up for work. As the hours dragged on with no news, her friends and co-workers grew increasingly anxious. Eventually, one of her colleagues decided to drive over and check on her just to make sure everything was okay. That decision would turn out to be incredibly important and would leave a mark on her memory forever. The moment the door opened, she was met with a sight straight out of a nightmare. The air was thick with the metallic smell of blood, and Sadie lay face down in the hallway in a pool of her own blood. It's hard to even imagine what goes through your mind when you find someone you care about like that. And honestly, after something like this, you probably never go back to being the same person again. It was immediately clear this wasn't an accident. Sadie had been murdered brutally. No wonder her friend called the police right away. The level of violence was beyond shocking. In total, Sadie had suffered more than 50 wounds on her face, neck, torso, and limbs. Some of the blows were so severe they actually fractured bone. And the numerous defensive wounds on her hands and wrists told a heartbreaking story. Sadie had fought desperately for her life. When the police arrived, even the most seasoned officers were stunned. Later, investigators would describe the scene as an orgy of demonic savagery. Yeah, kind of a weird phrase, but sadly, it made for a striking newspaper headline across the country. There was no doubt about it. Whoever had done this needed to be found fast. Officers immediately got to work, combing through the house for any clue, and that's when they discovered something crucial. While examining Sadie's clothing, they found a small metal hook, something that looked like it came from a stun gun, and in the UK, that kind of weapon is extremely rare. Could this be the key to finding her killer? For now, detectives could only document every piece of evidence and make sure nothing was missed. But the next big question was obvious. Who could possibly be capable of such a vicious attack? And why would anyone want Sadie dead? As investigators dug deeper, the answers they uncovered turned out to be far stranger and far darker than anyone could have imagined. She was born in 1955 inches, England, and friends and family remember her as caring, kind, and full of life. By the time she hit 60, Sadie had built a strong family and a successful career. She was the co-founder of Hartley Taylor Medical Communications, which she started with her best friend, Julie Taylor. Sadie had a genuine passion for medical science and wanted to help advance it through new technology. She dedicated her professional life to organising conferences and projects aimed at improving intensive care treatments and tackling some of the toughest challenges in haematology and infectious diseases. Julie later recalled that Sadie could hardly ever step away from work, even after having children. And honestly, it makes sense, that's just who she was. Passionate, tireless, always trying to balance ambition with real life. And let's be real, fellow workaholics probably get it, we're just built differently. By 2016, her kids, Charlotte and Harry, were grown and had moved out. Even though they no longer lived in the village, their bond with their mom remained incredibly close. And just a day before her murder, Charlotte called with some absolutely thrilling news. She was engaged. Of course, Sadie was over the moon. She immediately started tossing around wedding ideas and was excited, thinking about all the upcoming celebrations. And that's exactly why it's so heartbreaking she never got to see any of it. At her Helmshore home, Sadie lived with her partner, 57-year-old Ian Johnston, a former firefighter who was a few years younger than her. They led a quiet, cozy life in a lovely house, and everyone knew them as a warm, balanced couple enjoying their golden years. But Ian later described their relationship as cocoa and kindles, calm evenings, gentle laughter, and simple, happy love. But Sadie had no way of knowing that long, dark shadows from Ian's past were slowly creeping closer, ready to shatter everything she had worked so hard to build. So, now it's time to dive into Ian and his love life. And honestly, things weren't exactly rosy. See, Ian had a past that Sadie only knew bits and pieces of, and that past was about to come back in a way that would completely destroy their lives. A few years before Ian moved in with Sadie, he unexpectedly met a much younger woman, Sarah Williams, who could honestly be called a professional homewrecker. Their first encounter was almost comical. They literally bumped into each other on a closed ski slope. At the time, Ian was working part-time as an instructor and Sarah was a travel agent, and oh my god, the spark between them was instant. Ian later admitted that, in a moment of total lack of common sense, he invited Sarah to his place after their very first meeting. And while we can't know exactly what he expected, Sarah showed up in a miniskirt and high heels. Here's the kicker, this all happened while Ian was already seeing Sadie. Yeah, their relationship was long distance at the time, but it was real. Deep down, Ian knew exactly what he was doing was wrong. And as you've probably guessed, the consequences of that decision were going to be catastrophic. For Sarah Williams, seducing other people's men was nothing new. People who knew her called her a serial mistress. By her early 30s, Sarah had spent more than half her life as a secret lover to wealthy men, usually at least 40 years older than her. One of these relationships, a 60-year-old millionaire, which started when Sarah was just 17 and it lasted almost 20 years. Mr. Hardwick was her generous sugar daddy. He gave her a credit card, paid her £320 a week, and whisked her away on luxury vacations around the world more than 10 times a year. Sarah kept chasing new thrills outside of it. And that's exactly when she met Ian Johnston. Their affair with Ian flared up fast, but it fizzled just as quickly. By late 2013, Ian started feeling increasingly uncomfortable around Sarah. He realised he truly loved Sadie and admitted to himself that cheating had been a huge mistake. But here's the problem. Ian wanted it to end, but Sarah had other plans. As usual, she became increasingly possessive, dramatic, and impossible to deal with. By October 2014, about 2 years after the affair began, Ian finally ended it. But Sarah, with her massive ego, wasn't about to just vanish from Ian's life. Nope, she became absolutely obsessed with him, like to a full-blown mania. And that obsession quickly spread to Sadie, who Sarah saw as the main obstacle between herself and the man she thought was perfect. And if Sarah couldn't have Ian, well, nobody could. Her reaction was almost immediate. Just a few days after a phone call, Sadie received an anonymous letter. It contained dark, chilling details about Ian's affair. The letter was full of insults and threats. Sarah even wrote that Ian didn't even bother changing the sheets after spending the night with me. I could say Ian was made to confess, but honestly that's putting it way too lightly. He was basically caught red-handed, and his relationship with Sadie nearly fell apart. But, in true Sadie fashion, she chose to forgive him. Ian promised it would never happen again. Despite the betrayal, Sadie's love held strong. They even decided to take their relationship to the next level. Ian moved into her Helmshore home, determined to leave Sarah in the past, but as we'll see, that didn't exactly happen. The rejection only fed Sarah's obsession. She didn't back off. If anything, she got way more relentless, swinging between desperate pleading and explosive fits of rage. She sent Ian gifts, bombarded him with long messages, even begged for intimacy. Sarah started stalking the places he went, trying to run into him by accident. At one point, she even broke a lock and let herself into his house while Ian wasn't home. The alarm went off and the police turned up. Ian later told friends and family he felt persecuted, like Sarah simply wouldn't leave him alone. But despite all that, he made one fatal mistake that ultimately did him in. See, Ian never fully cut ties. In moments of weakness, he still traded flirtatious messages with Sarah, even after moving in with Sadie. That whole 1 foot in, 1 foot out thing meant neither relationship got a proper end, and it only deepened the tragedy that was looming. For months, that push and pull went on. In fact, just 10 days before the murder, on the 4th of January 2016, Ian and Sarah exchanged over 30 flirty messages in a single day. What Ian saw as despair, though, was actually morphing into something far darker. Sarah's obsession was on the verge of becoming what prosecutors would later call delusion, instability, and deep psychosis. No question, she was jealous and furious, and she started to craft a plan. Actually, as early as summer 2014, just weeks after Ian ended things, she told her close friend Katrina Walsh about it. By the way, I'm not sure Sarah had many friends her own age. Katrina was almost twice her age, about 56, and she was just as unstable. The two had met through a local riding club and bonded over horse rides, gossip, and eventually violence. And we know this because Katrina didn't act like a comforting shoulder so much as an enabler. She approved of taking Sarah's sick fantasies all the way. Turns out neither of them tried very hard to hide it. Katrina especially was open about it. Look, I'd never recommend murder, obviously, but if you're even thinking about it, probably don't write down every single detail in your diary. Sarah desperately wanted Sadie gone. Katrina, whether out of loyalty, a taste for thrills, or just plain moral decay, was ready to help her friend. Together, they started inventing what they creepily called the perfect murder. For the next year and a half, the pair kept planning and replanning. They honestly looked like the stereotypical villains straight out of a terrible movie. And, Katrina actually fit the part. If there was one thing she loved more than her horses, it was documenting every single detail of her own downfall. Her diary eventually became a step-by-step log of the murder plot, every meeting, the supplies they needed, and their darkest fantasies. They came up with loads of ways to kill Sadie poisoning, staging accidents, even hiring a hitman. In mid-2015, Sarah actually floated the idea to Katrina's husband Kevin, asking if he'd take care of Sadie for a fee. Luckily, he had a bit more sense than the two of them and immediately twigged that Sarah and Katrina had lost it. So Kevin refused to help and decided to cut ties with them for good. Sarah and Katrina decided to do the dirty work themselves, and they had zero intention of being subtle about it. That kicked off the official planning phase, collecting tools and clothing, practicing routines, and of course surveillance. Sarah already knew Ian's habits, but she wanted to track Sadie specifically. They checked things like, was Sadie ever home alone? Which doors were left unlocked? How predictable was her daily routine? Around October 2015, the pair bought a covert GPS tracker and stuck it under Ian's car. From then on, Sarah could follow when the couple left and returned home. The device later revealed 2 months' worth of movements, and honestly, that wasn't even the worst of what she did. Sadie and Ian always attended the Chill Factory Ski Club's Christmas dinner. On the 2nd of December 2015, Sarah trailed them to the event. She slipped into a corner and ended up in the background of one of the group photos. There's Sadie and Ian in the foreground, smiling, totally unaware that Sarah is standing right behind them. Katrina and Sarah also bought binoculars for spying from a distance, burner phones for secret messages, and even wore weird uniforms to make identification harder. They didn't want Sarah's car spotted on CCTV, so they bought a cheap silver Renault Clio registered in someone else's name, and they ordered men's work boots 2 sizes too big, to throw off any footprint evidence. Because stun guns are illegal for civilians in the UK, they took a ferry to Rotterdam, drove to Darmstadt in Germany, and bought a 500,000 volt device, which they then smuggled back into the UK. And it really does seem Katrina was weirdly thrilled by the whole adventure. Honestly, between Sarah's arrogant ego and Katrina's diary, I'm surprised they didn't mail the police a calendar invite to the murder. Their murder kit was sadly ready. The only thing left was timing. They decided to strike when Sadie would be home alone, and as it turned out, fate gave them a perfect window. Mid-January 2016, Ian had a trip to Switzerland planned. Even that bit of planning wasn't enough though, because in the classic style of amateurs trying to be villains, they decided to do a rehearsal. And believe it or not, that rehearsal literally meant walking up to Sadie's front door. I'm not kidding, they actually planned a full dress rehearsal. On the 7th of January 2016, a week before the murder, Katrina walked up to Sadie's front door and pressed the bell. They even had a face-to-face moment when Sadie opened the door. Katrina handed her a bouquet of flowers. And the whole thing was weird on so many levels. The flowers looked cheap and pathetic, not a thoughtful gesture, more like something grabbed at the checkout. It was obvious Sadie was totally baffled. She didn't know who Katrina was and had never seen her face before. Meanwhile, Katrina knew everything about Sadie, but before Sadie could even ask who she was, the stranger just turned and walked away. It was an incredibly odd encounter, to say the least. From the text Sadie sent over the next few days, you could tell she was a little unsettled, but not overly alarmed. Honestly, I'd probably have assumed some crazy woman had the wrong house. But for Sarah and Katrina, that little episode delivered the exact reassurance they wanted. Now they knew Sadie could be home alone and that she might actually answer the door for a stranger. And from that moment on, their sick fantasy started to harden into a real plan. Helmshore was quiet under the bite of winter. The streets were empty, the air crisp, and Sadie had settled in for a calm evening at home. Ian had been away on a ski trip for a few days, and Sadie had spent her day juggling work calls, wedding planning for her daughter, and household chores. But as twilight fell over the valley, Sarah and Katrina were already on their way. They arrived just after 7 p.m, pulling up on Sunnybank Road in their disposable car, hidden in the shadows. Sarah was armed with a 20cm kitchen knife and a 500,000 volt stun gun. She was going to be the direct attacker. Katrina stayed behind the wheel, watching, waiting, ready to drive into freedom, and honestly acting with what might have been the most twisted moral compass imaginable. The doorbell rang shortly after 8 p.m, and the moment the latch clicked, Sarah lunged inside. She pressed the stun gun to Sadie's head. 500,000 volts coursed through her body, knocking her off her feet. Sadie didn't pass out, but she was paralyzed, completely unable to move. From that moment, she was utterly defenseless. What happened next can only be described as barbaric, frenzied violence. Sarah grabbed the knife and struck her over and over, landing dozens of blows in a wild rage. The police later called it demonic frenzy. Even semi-paralyzed, Sadie tried to fight back, leaving deep defensive cuts on her hands and palms. But Sarah didn't stop. Sadie suffered over 50 injuries across her body. Within minutes, she lay still, and Sarah stood above her, staring at the aftermath of her brutal assault. Then, almost casually, she looked around, straightened her posture, quietly shut the front door, and walked out. Seconds later, Katrina pulled up. Sarah got into the car, and the two women vanished into the night. As we know, Sadie's body was only discovered the next day, but there's no doubt that that night, as they drove away, both women were riding a peak of adrenaline. And the strangest part, how calm they were afterward. No panic, no fear, no fuss. We know this from later evidence. After the murder, they drove calmly to Sarah's house in Chester, changed clothes, and watched the movie like nothing had happened. And believe it or not, they watched Mamma Mia. It's almost impossible to imagine a more absurd choice of movie after committing such a crime. The gap between the murder and sitting down to watch a musical is so staggering that it's hard to comprehend. They seemed completely calm, utterly unshaken, but little did they know, in Helmshore, the chain of events that would lead to their downfall had already begun. Around noon the next day, Sadie's friend made the horrifying discovery. Police arrived, secured the scene, and found the small electrode on her clothing. This was the starting point of unraveling the mystery, discovering who had killed Sadie. Investigators immediately asked the key question: who could have wanted Sadie Hartley dead? Nothing at the scene suggested robbery or a random attack. This was personal, deliberate. So the investigation began at the basics. Interviews with friends, colleagues, family, and of course, Ian. As is common in murder cases, Ian was initially considered a suspect, but his alibi was airtight. He had been in another country. He then told detectives about his past affair with Sarah Williams and her obsessive fixation on him. He mentioned the anonymous letter and the strange woman spotted near the house a week earlier. Suddenly, detectives had everything: motive, suspect, and direction. A closer look at Sarah's profile quickly revealed her close friendship with Katrina, which raised even more questions. Then, reviewing CCTV footage from around the village, the investigation began to move remarkably fast. In a small town, unfamiliar cars stand out. When police spotted the silver Renault Clio passing Sunnybank Road around the time of the attack, it became clear there was a trail to follow. Expanding their search, detectives discovered even more footage. Cameras caught Sarah's black Volvo driving past Ian and Sadie's street multiple times in odd hours throughout December. On one of the recordings, Sarah was even caught crouching near Ian's car, removing the tracking device she had planted a few weeks earlier. CCTV footage from the nearby Tesco in Haslington showed Sarah and Katrina buying a cheap bouquet of flowers on the same evening that Sadie received that suspicious gift delivery. Gradually, the police built an incredibly clear picture of what had happened. The evidence was so plentiful and convincingly damning that, within a week, Lancashire police made the arrests. In the early hours of the 20th of January 2016, simultaneous raids were conducted at the homes nicknamed Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Ironically, because the documentary crew was accompanying the police that week, Sarah's arrest was even captured on camera. Even after being taken into custody, both Sarah and Katrina insisted they knew nothing and had no involvement, but their story didn't last long. During a search of Katrina's home, police found literally everything needed for the case. An 8-inch kitchen knife, a high-voltage stun gun, oversized boots still stained with Sadie's blood, and, most importantly, Katrina's personal diaries. By this point, the evidence against them was more than sufficient. Sarah claimed that on the night of the murder, she had been at home, sick, and, according to her, Katrina had acted entirely on her own without her permission or knowledge, supposedly to impress her. Katrina, however, came up with an even stranger explanation. She told the police she thought she was participating in a TV show, something like Hunted, where contestants must evade capture. Katrina even claimed she feared that Sarah might kill her next. It's safe to say that neither story convinced anyone. The detectives had CCTV footage, forensic results, phone records, and even diary entries that unequivocally linked both of them to the murder. For these two, the game was over. Later, while still in custody, Katrina even agreed to show the police where she had disposed of the knife, stun gun, and other evidence. Everything was still exactly where she had left it. Even stranger, the entire process was filmed by a TV crew, which, in retrospect, proved invaluable for future true crime documentaries. In the summer of 2016, Sarah Williams and Katrina Walsh were officially charged with murder. Their so-called perfect crime had collapsed so spectacularly that it became a national sensation. The trial lasted 7 long weeks, and the jury was shocked by the sheer volume of evidence. CCTV footage of Sarah and Katrina, the bouquet of flowers, the murder weapons, diary entries, and even a photograph from the ski club's Christmas party. When Ian testified, it was clear he was deeply shaken and exhausted. He had to recount his affair with Sarah and even read aloud explicit messages they had exchanged. It was undoubtedly humiliating, but truth be told, he had brought much of it upon himself. At one point, Ian broke down in tears, admitting he could never have imagined that his foolish actions would lead to something so horrific. He confessed that he had felt stalked and had tried to cut off contact long before the tragedy. Sarah's defense, meanwhile, suggested that Ian had given her false hope, and Sarah claimed she hadn't killed Sadie, that it had been entirely Katrina's doing. But the prosecution relentlessly dismantled this version of events. If that were true, then why did she spend months tracking Sadie, buying flowers for a test run, and even travelling to Germany to purchase a stun gun? Katrina's defence wasn't much stronger. Her lawyers painted her as an eccentric, older dreamer who was supposedly manipulated by Sarah. And while Katrina certainly was, let's say, eccentric, her own diaries told a very different story. In the end, after 7 weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury needed only 7 hours to reach a verdict. In August 2016, Sarah Williams and Katrina Walsh were found guilty of murder. Sarah Williams was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years. Katrina Walsh received life with a minimum of 25 years. Fortunately, both remain behind bars. The media quickly dubbed Sarah a bunny boiler, a nickname Katrina herself had given her in her diary, and it was remarkably fitting. Sadie's son Harry told the court how his mother had been taken far too soon and without cause, describing the immense void her absence left behind. Ian admitted that he has since felt overwhelming guilt and publicly apologised to Sadie's family, acknowledging that he opened the door to someone else's chaos. And yes,
the murder in her own home can only be described as a premeditated, brutal and senseless act committed against a defenceless lady who was home alone at the time. Albeit Williams may have been the one that wielded the knife on this evening, there can be no doubt that Katrina Walsh was also heavily involved in this dreadful, dreadful crime.
The brutal, evil and cowardly attack perpetrated against this defenceless Sadie tore into our families, friends and the communities we live in. There can be no forgiveness for such vile behaviour.
He truly should feel shame. But the other truth is that he couldn't have known this would ultimately lead to murder. In an interview, he said, "Every morning I ask myself why I responded to those messages," adding that he regrets not seeing the danger sooner. After the murder, Sadie's family asked Ian to leave the house, and he later learned he was not even mentioned in her will, a painful but fair consequence. The murder of Sadie Hartley remains one of the most disturbing modern cases in Britain. At its core was a deadly love triangle fueled by obsession and cruelty. The small village of Helmshore was never the same, nor was Sadie's family. Sadie lost her life simply for loving someone. She was a dedicated mother, a successful professional, and a kind-hearted person, and tragically, her life and all her achievements were destroyed by the hands of two cruel women. Do you think Sarah and Katrina received sentences they truly deserved? As always, share your thoughts in the comments below. That's it for today, friends. I truly appreciate your presence, and of course, stay safe and stay curious. Thank you, and goodbye.